put it in comparison in words, but if you ever see the Never-Ending Story, there's that giant tortoise in there. We're talking turtles like that size and elephants like that size. And so then they decided they wanted to go home, and the giants cautioned them it's not a good idea, because you're going to have to exit out the South Pole. It's completely blocked with ice. It's even more dangerous, but they insisted they needed to get back home to his mother and his father's wife. And so gold is really abundant inside the earth, so they gave them all the gold that they could carry, sent them on their way. They got just outside of the South Polar opening when an iceberg flipped, capsized the ship. He lost his father, ended up on this ice, and was picked up by a whaler. When he told his story to the whaler, they locked him in the brig for being insane. So then he changed his story and said he was delusional. I mean, he was lucky enough that he got found on an iceberg. Yeah. But he just said he was on another whaling ship and he had been delirious. When he got back home, his mother had died, his uncle had taken over his lands, and when he told his uncle the story, his uncle's like, "Oh, would you tell this story again to a couple of my friends here?" Because he wanted his uncle to further an expedition to go back. Because his mom was dead and he liked it in there, he wanted to go back. So his uncle said, "Can you tell his story again to some of my friends?" He did. As soon as the story was done, 2 constables walked in, and they took him to an insane asylum where he spent 27 years of his adult life locked away. Wow. In the 1800s, which is horrible. He ended up settling in America, in Chicago, and then in L.A., where he met Willis George Emerson, promised him a fantastic story that he wouldn't repeat till his deathbed. And the reason is because of all the trauma he went through from his 27 years locked up in an insane asylum. A friend of mine, Stefan Sindoni, who's helped me a lot in this research, I challenged him because he lives in New York, right near the New York City Library. And he went in and researched Olaf Jansen and did find him in Chicago and did find a ship. When he got out of the insane asylum, he went right down to the seaboard and started, looking for a job and got a job. And I can't remember the name of the captain, but Stefan was able to verify that was a real merchant ship captain back then. Wow. So it solidifies that this man indeed could have been very real. And so I want to break down how planets form, but before I do that, do you have any more questions at this point?
So do the we can kind of get into this later, but I was just going to ask about like the giants. Do you think that when they find giants' bones and stuff on our crust or in our, I guess, the outer Earth, how do you think they got there? Did they come up out of there and come into our world, or?
I think that what happens is that over time, and this is one of the biggest puzzles and pieces that I'll probably get into more next week in that interview, but over time, certain groups of giants in the hollow earth migrate to the surface of the earth. And that's actually a good question, because I'm going to explain how the planets form. And remind me of that just a minute when I get done with that, because it has a lot to do with white men. So what happens is in the hollow earth hypothesis, okay, is that as a planet forms and it's gaseous and everything, it becomes a solid liquid, and all of the iron, nickel, gold, uranium, everything collects in the middle, and the lighter crustal materials are on the outside of that heavy, dense ball, and it's spinning in space, and this forms a bubble shaft and then a solid shaft down to the core. And eventually that shaft encompasses that whole center star ball, and it expands, and the crust floats away, and it cools more rapidly on the outside, but the inside is still really hot. So liquid magma, okay, flows up the inside of the planet, and it pulls up around the polar openings, making them very strong. If you look at Mars, there's a pressure ridge around the poles, and the poles have like a crater appearance with ice plugs in them. Then the inner crust cools, and atmosphere is being pulled into the Earth and equalizing with the outside. And as it expands, more and more atmosphere ends up on the inside of the planet. The inner sun is not a nuclear furnace like out here. It is actually just a ball of iron, nickel, crystal, gold, all the heavier elements. And what happens is that the vortex of air exchanging that takes warm, moist air and expels it outside the planet brings cold air in. And I hypothesized that it brings cold air in all the way down to the poles of each end of the center star, and it picks up charged particulate from the half-life of atoms breaking off and decaying from the metal, and that rides back out, and those charged particles is what creates our aurora borealis and or aurora australis. And then that cold hits both poles and drives all the way through the core, creating like a solid iron ball, and all the rest of the heat from the pressure it's under escapes all the other surfaces and gives off heat and light like a warm glowing lamp. There's enough radiation decay coming off of it to feed plants and animals. And what I was getting to with the white people, and I'm not racist by any means, but my thinking is that a lot of, or all of the whites, are humans that either migrated inside the earth and lost pigmentation in their eyes and their skin over time because they're not hit by solar radiation out here. Yeah. And it's less solar radiation in there and then re-emerged. Or humanity started in there and only expanded to the outside of the earth later. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Definitely.
And so that's pretty much everything to do with Hollow Earth and the makeup of it. And we get into some of the historical significance of Hollow Earth. There's a diary from Admiral Richard Baird. He was a Medal of Honor recipient who was a polar explorer who reportedly flew into the Hollow Earth, but the secret diary has been speculated to be a fake. But some of the things that he mentions, or at least supposedly mentions in this diary, collaborate the Hollow Earth and what's inside, talking about mammoths being right inside the neck, flying at an elevation of about 1,500 feet, being guided by these craft that almost like out of Star Wars somewhere, had taken over his craft and were guiding him in and landed him, and then he was taken to some leaders of great stature in there, and he was warned that they were watching us because we had just dropped nuclear weapons outside the Earth, and they were warning us that that was a technology that we should not be messing with, and to return to our leaders. And so that's supposedly what Admiral Baird did. He went back to our United States and talked to Congress and said, look, these guys have craft with incredible speed, but they wanted him to go down and fight the Germans over Antarctica anyways, underneath the guise of Operation High Jump, a follow-up for that. And so he reportedly went back to Antarctica, where he started a war with the Germans, again, a secret war down at the South Pole, and these craft came out, inter-Earth defense craft, and obliterated our fleet and sent them back home limping. And that's why the Antarctica is supposedly off limits. is because it's actually a province or part of the Hollow Earth lands.
Mm-hmm.
And so the North Pole and South Pole are off limits. It's like a treaty that they can come down and do scientific research, that sort of thing, discovery, but they cannot bring weapons or any kind of warfare to the poles.
Yeah. Interesting.
And so a lot of people don't understand why we don't go there. You're not allowed to. That in the Hollow Earth theory realm, that is why. Now, what made me believe all of this? First off, like the scientific part, like I was talking about, like the weather, the wind directions, everything making more sense. But I was at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science on April 23rd, 2011. I went there with my sons because it was a free day to take them to see the pirate exhibit.
Mm-hmm.
And also I had a backup plan of going and seeing if I could see any of the polar openings or polar auroras on the planets in the Space Odyssey Center there. And I went in and they showed the auroras, but they didn't show the direct poles. All the pictures were angled where it was dark and you couldn't see. But then a person was showing a projection of earthquakes on the Earth in Chile and different areas around the planet. I went over there, and this guy was there, and he's like, hey, to the projector guy, he's like, hey, I'm from Alaska. Can I see Alaska? And the guy's like, sure. And he tilted the display down to where he could really see Alaska good. And I noticed all the representation for the North was no ice caps, no nothing, just water. So I walked around the other side thinking, well, maybe they have Antarctica, maybe they don't. Would be at the base of the display, so I walked around there, and sure enough, they had Antarctica. Not only that, they had a polar opening and had splits in the ice sheet where it looked like rivers coming out of the pole. So I snapped 2 pictures of that.
Mm-hmm.
So then I started getting excited. First I walked up to the projector guy and said, do you realize your projection has a hole in Antarctica? Instead of saying that's for the base of the display or something we haven't mapped yet, he goes, mm-hmm, and grumbled. And so I got out of the museum. I was like on cloud 9, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm getting out of here before they make me delete my pictures or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it was like the holy grail. The only other thing out there that even remotely maybe showed it was a video of an auroral stream. If you look up South Pole auroral stream or auroral crown, you can see that video, and you'll actually see the aurora borealis, or Australia is coming out of there. In one video where there's a cloud with a hole in the middle, it looks like a 6-sided cloud. Mm-hmm. The other one is where it's the continent, and you'll see a flash right where the polar opening is. And again, that video, Chris Baird theory, there's a half-an-hour video that has a lot of those pictures in it. So then I was watching everything that I could to see if I could find polar openings. Apollo 13 had like what looked like a hollow Earth opening when they were showing some of the NASA imagery on that. And then I was watching Deadliest Catch, and when they would come back from a commercial, I could see radial ice at the North Pole, and then I noticed that, I took a couple pictures of it, and I noticed this huge hole in Baffin Bay with clouds coming out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I started looking everywhere I could. There was this, and one of my previous, I think in that video I mistake this, and I say it was a National Geographic show, but on the Weather Channel, I believe there was a show about Canada's dangerous roads. There's another picture of the Baffin Bay area of between Greenland and Canada, and it's got a hole in it with clouds coming up all the way up to the upper atmosphere. They look like clear tornadoes until they reach the top of the atmosphere and they turn to cloud. Unless it's really cold, they start turning into cloud at the base.
Yeah.
So I found all these different things, and then more recently, I started thinking about the Bermuda Triangle and the Dragon's Triangle in Asia. And I started looking and finding these same vortex tubes coming right out of the water in those areas, turning into cloud at the top. But not only that, I started seeing where those vortex tubes would go from one pole opening to another pole opening and suck in and out with a long tube in between of clouds. And Tyler was secured